Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we are diving headfirst into a seriously major turning point in history
Oh, yeah.
and asking ourselves a question that I think is, really fundamental when we talk about the American Revolution.
Hmm.
Was it actually revolutionary?
Right.
Truly revolutionary?
Yeah.
We got an amazing collection of stuff from you guys this time around. Everything from, like historical analyses that you found online to actual real documents from that period,
Wow.
which I gotta say gives us a fantastic jumping off point to explore, how transformative this whole era really was.
For sure.
So was it just swapping out, one set of rulers for another?
Yeah.
Or did it actually like totally reshape society?
Totally.
That is what we are here to unpack.
That's what we're here to find out, right? We're not just, interested in like dates and names.
Mhm.
We want to understand like how deep it went and how far it spread, the changes, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And the sources that you sent in, they really do create this rich picture.
Yeah.
They let us examine the revolution from like those first sparks
Yeah.
all the way through to, how it still affects the whole world.
I like that the sparks. Okay, so let's start, poking around in the ashes a bit and seeing, what exactly lit this whole fire in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Why did the colonists even want this radical change?
Yeah.
It's not like it was just like, oh, one day we decided this.
No, it was a process for
Yeah.
sure.
Right.
And you can see in what you sent in this growing feeling of like being left out, among the colonists during the 1700s.
Mm.
And it makes sense when you think about it. These weren't just like some abstract laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
They controlled everything, like
Yeah.
how they traded stuff, their money even.
Right.
But they had zero say in making those laws.
Yeah.
And that created this feeling like deep down that it was all just wrong.
Yeah.
Like in the eyes of the colonists, the whole system lacked legitimacy.
Yeah.
And that's huge. That's a key insight into like why this revolution even happened. Because despite all their hard work, building up the colonies, they felt totally powerless, ruled by these decisions made like thousands of miles away without any input from them.
Yeah, like what's the point? Right.
Yeah.
You're working so hard, but
Second
someone somewhere else.
in all the shots.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then on top of that, you add in these British laws and taxes that just felt
Oh, yeah.
more and more unfair. The sources talk a lot about the Stamp Act.
Right.
So can you remind us what that even was and why it got everyone so riled up?
Oh, the Stamp Act is like the perfect example of the kind of taxes that just like lit a fire under the colonists.
Mm-hmm.
It was this rule that they had to pay a tax on basically every single thing they printed, newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards.
Wow.
It affected pretty much every part of their daily life.
Right.
And they had absolutely no representation in the government that imposed this tax.
Right.
It felt like a direct attack on their rights,
Yeah.
and a total disregard for all they had done.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about the money either. It was about this principle, this idea of no taxation without representation,
Yeah.
which came from, the whole Whig philosophy that was popular back then.
Mm-hmm.
It basically said, look, consent matters. Citizens have rights against the power of the state.
So it's that feeling of constantly being taxed,
Yeah.
but having absolutely no control over
Exactly.
what that money goes.
Or the laws that govern you.
Right. Yeah, you can totally see how that would make people angry.
For sure.
And it wasn't like the colonists were just like complaining to each other about it,
No, they took action.
They got organized, right? The sources point to the rise of these really important leaders
Well, yeah,
who helped turn all that frustration into a real movement.
totally.
So tell us about some of those key figures.
So you have guys like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, right?
Yeah.
Washington, with his experience in the military, he was able to lead.
Yeah.
And he became this symbol of unity for all those different militias
Right.
that, eventually formed the Continental Army. Jefferson, on the other hand, brilliant thinker,
Mm-hmm.
amazing writer.
Right.
His ability to, like, put into words those big ideas behind the revolution.
Yeah.
Natural rights and self-government, that was huge.
Yeah.
It really inspired people and, helped shape the very foundation of America.
It's interesting they both brought, such different
Totally.
strengths. Yeah.
But it seems like they,
Complemented each other totally.
yeah, okay, so you have all this simmering resentment about representation,
Mm-hmm.
all these very real complaints like the Stamp Act.
Yeah,
And then you have these leaders who are stepping up and inspiring people.
for sure.
Things are definitely heating up. One
Yeah.
of the sources uses the analogy of a boiling pot,
Yeah.
which I think really captures that sense of like,
Yeah. That's a good one.
that mounting pressure.
Yeah, tensions were definitely arising.
Right.
Fueled by, all these ongoing issues.
Yeah.
And then you have certain events that just like act as catalysts.
Yeah.
They push things over the edge. Right. And I think the Boston Massacre is like a very clear example
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
of that kind of escalation.
Big time.
So the Boston Massacre, I think, is one of those historical events that even people who don't know a lot about this period, they've heard of it.
Yeah.
Can you remind us, like, what exactly went down there, and why was it such a turning point for the colonists in terms of moving them towards actually fighting for independence?
So in 1770, you have this group of British soldiers. They fire on a crowd of colonists.
Right.
5 people end up dead.
Yeah.
Historians still debate, exactly how it happened.
Right.
But the news of this event spread like wildfire
Right.
through the colonies.
Right.
And it became this really powerful symbol of British oppression.
Yeah.
Really galvanized public opinion,
Yeah.
And eroded whatever loyalty people still had to the crown.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, fighting for freedom isn't just something we want to do, it's something we have to do.
It was like, okay, now this is serious. Yeah. Okay, so from all these frustrations and these really tragic events, we start to see some real acts of rebellion. I think we got to talk about the Boston Tea Party, one of the most iconic events of the whole period.
Oh, for sure.
This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, though.
Oh, no, the Boston Tea Party in 1773 was like a deliberate and very symbolic act of defiance.
Right.
You have colonists, they dress up as Native Americans, they board these British ships in Boston Harbor and dump all these chests of tea right into the water.
Yeah.
To protest the Tea Act, which was just, another example of taxation without representation.
Right.
It was such a bold move.
It was a statement.
It was a statement. It was risky, too.
Yeah.
But it showed just how serious they were.
Yeah.
And how far they were willing to go to fight against British authority.
And then things escalate even further with the battles of Lexington and Concord.
Oh, yeah.
Often called the shot heard around the world. What makes these kind of early skirmishes so important in the grand scheme of things?
Well, Lexington and Concord happened in April 1775.
Okay.
And they really marked the moment when things went from political protest to, actual armed conflict.
Right.
These are the very first battles between colonial militias, just ordinary citizens picking up arms,
Right.
and professional British soldiers.
Yeah.
Now, the battles themselves were pretty small,
Yeah.
but they were hugely significant because they basically signal the start of the war for independence.
Yeah.
The fact that colonists were willing to fight against, the mighty British Empire
Right.
showed that there was no going back.
It was like, okay, it's happening now.
Not.
Right. So from those first shots, the conflict obviously expands.
Yeah.
And just over a year later, we have the Declaration of Independence. It really feels like at that point, there is no turning back.
Right.
What was the real significance of that document?
The Declaration of Independence adopted on August 2nd, 1776 was like this huge turning point.
Okay.
It wasn't just a list of complaints against the British. It was a deep philosophical statement. It basically said, look, everyone has these fundamental rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Right.
And governments get their power from the people they govern. That was a radical idea back then.
Yeah.
It flipped the script on how power worked.
Yeah.
And then it formally declared the 13 colonies free and independent states,
Wow.
no longer tied to Great Britain.
Yeah.
This document gave the revolution its reason for being.
Right.
And it's still relevant today as a powerful statement about human rights and self-determination.
For sure.
And as your sources pointed out,
Yeah.
we celebrate it every 4th of July.
Exactly. It's such a, important holiday, but it's important to remember it laid the philosophical groundwork for a new nation.
Totally.
But the actual fighting was far from over.
No, not at all.
The Battle of Saratoga is often talked about as a major turning point in the war itself.
Yeah.
Why was that specific victory so important for the colonists?
So the Battle of Saratoga in 1777,
Okay.
it was a decisive win for the Continental Army.
Oh.
It was a huge morale boost for the Americans.
Yeah.
But even more importantly, it finally convinced France that the colonists could actually win this thing. And that led to France officially joining forces with the Americans.
Yeah.
They provided crucial military and financial support, soldiers, ships, supplies.
So basically they gave the colonists a fighting chance.
Totally. They tipped the scales in their favor.
Wow. So they got this much needed help at a really critical moment, but the sources also paint this picture of just like intense hardship.
Yeah.
for the Continental Army, especially during that brutal winter at Valley Forge.
Oh, man.
It wasn't all, glorious victories, was it?
No, Valley Forge was rough.
Yeah.
The winter of 1777, 1778 was just brutal for the Continental Army.
Yeah.
Shortages of everything, food, clothing, shelter,
Wow.
led to disease and death.
Right.
But it also shows how tough and dedicated they were to the cause of independence,
Yeah.
despite all that they persevered. And under Washington's leadership and with training from people like Baron von Steuben, they came out stronger, a more disciplined fighting force.
Right.
It really highlights the incredible sacrifices they made for their freedom.
And that resilience that you talked about that paid off at the Battle of Yorktown.
Oh, yeah.
This is seen as the final major battle of the war.
Right.
What happened there that led to that decisive British defeat?
Yorktown in 1781 was the culmination of this brilliant campaign.
Okay.
Americans and French working together.
Mm.
The French Navy played a huge role.
Okay.
They blockaded the Chesapeake Bay so the British couldn't get reinforcements or escape by sea.
Wow.
And then on land, you had Washington and the French General Rochambeau.
Yeah.
They trapped Cornwallis's army and forced them to surrender.
So they were basically surrounded.
Totally.
Wow.
That defeat really broke the British spirit
Yeah.
and paved the way for the peace talks that ultimately led to American independence.
Okay, so after all that struggle, after all that fighting,
Mm-hmm.
a new nation is born. The 13 colonies become the United States of America.
The USA.
That feels like a pretty huge revolutionary change.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But what other fundamental changes happened in the wake of the revolution, according to the sources you've been looking at?
Well, the creation of a whole new independent country with its own government,
Right.
that was a massive shift.
Yeah.
It marked the end of British rule.
Yeah.
But the changes went deeper than that.
Okay.
You had the creation of new laws, like the Constitution.
Right.
This was the new nation's rule book.
Right.
It created a system with a president courts, a Congress, with representatives from each state.
Okay.
The idea was to have a government that actually represented the people's will.
Yeah.
The opposite of what they had under the British monarchy,
Yeah.
this concept of a government getting its power from the people it governs, that was revolutionary
For
back
that
then.
definitely. Yeah. And with this new system came the promise of greater freedoms, right?
Yeah,
So sources talk about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, things like that.
absolutely. The revolution brought about a huge increase in freedoms.
Yeah.
The Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, guaranteed basic rights,
Right.
freedom of speech and religion,
Yeah.
and separating church and state,
Mm-hmm.
which was a key principle in the Constitution, meant
Yeah.
that people could practice any religion or no religion at all without government interference,
Yeah.
which was a huge change from how things were in the colonies before the Revolution.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up in all that progress, but it wasn't all positive, right?
No.
The sources also talk about westward expansion after the revolution
Right?
and the really terrible consequences for Native American tribes.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Winning the Revolution did open up all this land in the West,
Yeah.
but that expansion came at a huge cost to the Native Americans who already lived there.
Right.
The settlers wanted land and resources, and that led to conflict, displacement, and broken treaties,
Right.
which, goes against those ideals of liberty and justice that the revolution was supposed to be about.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember, and the sources point this out, that the revolution didn't magically bring about equality for everyone.
Yeah.
Slavery continued in many places,
Right.
and women still didn't have basic political rights.
Mm-hmm.
It shows that the revolution had its limits and its contradictions.
For sure. It's important to have that nuanced perspective when we look back at this period.
All right, so it's not just black and white. There's a lot of gray area.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's think about the different viewpoints on the revolution.
Right.
It wasn't a uniform experience, and our sources give us some really good insights into how various groups saw it. So let's start with the colonists themselves.
Okay.
How did they view the revolution?
Well, for many colonists, the revolution was this really deeply personal struggle for freedom and self-governance.
Yeah.
They were tired of being controlled by a power so far away.
Yeah.
And they believed that they had the right to decide their own fate.
Right.
There was this real sense of excitement and optimism about creating a new society based on liberty and the power of the people.
Yeah.
They were willing to risk everything for that.
Yeah, it was a huge gamble, but they believed in it.
They did.
Okay, now, on the other side of the Atlantic, how did people in Britain see the revolution?
Not favorably?
No, I imagine not.
I mean, to them, it was a slap in the face.
Yeah.
The general feeling was that the colonists were ungrateful.
Right.
They were defying the king and British law.
Right.
There was this expectation of loyalty.
Right.
And they worried that losing the colonies would seriously weaken the British Empire,
Hmm.
economically and politically.
So it was a direct challenge to their power
Oh, yeah, definitely.
on the world stage.
Totally.
Right. Okay, what about other countries? The sources mention France specifically.
Yeah.
They obviously played a big role in how things turned out.
Huge role.
So what motivated them to get involved?
Well, France's decision to back the colonists was mostly about self-interest.
Okay.
They had been rivals with Great Britain for a long time, and they saw this as a chance to weaken their enemy,
Right.
maybe gain some advantage.
Yeah.
So their alliance with the Americans was a smart move, geopolitically speaking.
Makes sense. Okay, and let's not forget about the role of women during this whole time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They did so much, even though they didn't have basic political rights.
Right. They were essential.
Yeah. The sources highlight how vital they were.
Yeah, they were amazing.
To the war effort.
They kept things running at home,
Yeah.
managed households and farms while the men were off fighting.
Right.
They made supplies for the army,
Right.
nursed the wounded. Some even acted as spies.
Wow.
Their contributions were huge, even though they were mostly excluded from politics at the time.
Yeah, they were the unsung heroes in a lot of ways.
Totally.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about all these different perspectives and how they all came together during this period.
Definitely.
Okay, now let's zoom out a bit and look at the American Revolution in a larger historical context. The sources we got have this really helpful table that compares it to the French, Haitian, and Russian revolutions. What can we learn from these comparisons?
Comparing these revolutions is really helpful
Yeah.
for understanding what makes the American Revolution unique.
Oh, okay.
We see some common themes like, people being unhappy with those in power,
Right.
big events that trigger change, and significant changes to society and government.
Yeah.
But the table also shows some things that set the American Revolution apart.
Okay.
For example, it didn't lead to as much violence and chaos
Mm-hmm.
as some of the others, like the French and Russian revolutions.
Right. That's an interesting observation. Why do you think that is?
Well, the sources suggest that the American Revolution was mostly about gaining specific political rights
Okay.
and self-determination rather than completely overhauling the whole social order, which was the case in France and Russia.
Yeah.
The colonists mainly wanted to keep their existing rights,
Right.
but under their own government.
Right. It was more about who was in charge
Exactly.
than about like restructuring society from the ground up.
Totally.
Yeah. And another really important point from this comparison is that the American Revolution was the first successful example of a colony
Right.
breaking away from European rule and creating a brand new independent nation.
Huge precedent.
Yeah. That must have had a huge impact on the rest of the world.
Oh, yeah. It was inspiring for sure
Right.
to see that it could be done,
Yeah.
that you could challenge and defeat a powerful empire
Yeah.
and build your own nation based on those Enlightenment ideals.
Yeah. Okay. So bringing it all together based on all the info you've gathered from these sources, what's your overall take? Was the American Revolution truly evolutionary in its impact?
Based on the evidence, I'd say it was a truly revolutionary event.
Mm.
It led to the creation of a new country founded on freedom and democracy,
Right.
and it changed North America forever.
Yeah.
Plus, its impact on people in other countries fighting for their own freedom is undeniable.
Yeah. It's hard to overstate how inspiring that was.
Totally.
Right. It showed the world that you could actually overthrow a powerful empire
Exactly.
and create a government based on the will of the people.
It seemed impossible, but they did it.
Yeah. So the spread of those American revolutionary ideas, freedom, democracy, self-government,
Yeah,
inspired so many other revolutions and movements around the world.
for sure.
It's amazing.
It is.
And, the revolution wasn't perfect.
No,
We talked about slavery and women's rights.
Right.
It had its flaws,
definitely.
but it undeniably brought about significant and lasting change
Oh, yeah.
that we still feel today.
For sure, it showed the power of people to work together,
Yeah.
to fight for a better future, even when it seems impossible.
Yeah. That's a powerful message. So to wrap up our deep dive today, I think it's clear that the American Revolution was much more than just a change in leadership.
Right.
It was a profound event that reshaped the political landscape and sparked these ideas of freedom and self-governance that spread across the globe.
And that brings us to something I want you to think about.
Okay.
We talk about the limits of the revolution.
Yeah. Slavery, women's rights.
Exactly. How does understanding those complexities change our view of its impact?
Hmm.
And how does it affect how we see the ongoing fight for those ideals today?
Right.
It's a question that's still relevant
For sure.
as we grapple with the past and work towards a more just future for everyone.
That's a great question to leave us with. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Until then.
Bye.